invincible. I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I got my rocks off. Oh, how good is this?
Bound for Glory on Sin FM, your only football program, and we're going to be kicking off by talking about all this weekend's action so far, starting off with Port and Collingwood, of course, talking about the other games, Freo and Geelong, Hawthorn and Sydney, and previewing today's game. Make sure you text us in on 0427 767 767, and going around the panel, I'm Jordan.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Ben.
I'm Peter.
Yeah, it was strange afternoon and evening of football yesterday. Obviously, there are other events elsewhere in the world, in this country that were a bit bigger, and I felt they overshadowed the magnitude of the upsets.
Well, depends what side you're coming from. I was quite happy it was overshadowing it a little bit.
Of course you would be.
Yeah, of course you would, Pete. But it's hard to sort of sit here and say, yeah, I sat down on a Wednesday or a Thursday during the week and said I picked Port or I picked Fremantle, because you could make arguments for it, but it never seemed as if it was a possibility until, and I think in both games, until late in the first quarter, when Collingwood and Geelong, they both attacked hard. They both had something like 5 or 6 scoring shots. They only kicked a goal out of it, and you felt as if the momentum was just going to override Freo and override Port, and we'll talk about the Collingwood-Port game first. But I just see some similarities between the games, because we just thought, oh no, here's another final which these teams are going to get smashed, and here we are. We've got 2 underdog defeats.
Footy's a funny game sometimes. Last night we saw Port Adelaide, full of confidence, full of run, full of fluency and cohesion, I suppose. And on the other hand, we had Collingwood, who was playing their 8th consecutive final series, looking shaky and nervous almost. It was really weird to see, a Collingwood side that we know has had their ups and downs, seeing them make a lot of mistakes. They were really shocking in the forward half with their disposal. They were missing targets all the time. And Port Adelaide, on the other hand, were running and handballing and hitting their targets. I think they were going at 80% disposal efficiency at one stage. So, they were fantastic.
Yeah, I think it definitely came down to Port Adelaide's fitness on the counter-attack was when they were most damaging. Brad Ebert, Chad Wingard and Tom Logan as well, which was a bit of a surprise. They were all, they were just absolutely dominating. I think Wingard had something like 19 disposals, but he had 3 goals won and 9 score involvements, and every time he got the ball in his hands, it was always around that forward 50 arc, and I think Collingwood just didn't have an answer for him.
Yeah, there was one play, I think, in the third quarter where Hamish Hartlett was being tackled and Wingard ran out behind him, and Hartlett just dished out the handball, and Wingard, under pressure from about 80 metres out, he just swings around in his left foot and hits Jay Schultz on the chest, and I was stunned by it, as a player with remarkable talent. He's just incredible the way he can find players and find score involvements and goals, and he kicked 3 last night. It just shows how important a player he is up forward.
How did GWS pass him up? Seriously,
I think the homesickness might have played into their hands a little bit.
That's freaky though. He's so talented, and he's underrated because he's over in South Australia. You hear so much about other talents. I guess you hear a lot about Crouch and O'Meara and things like that, but aside from them, you don't hear a lot about the other interstate youngsters.
I tell you what, he's not going to be underrated for long, because
Yeah.
if he keeps putting on performances like that on the big stage, he's not going to fly under the radar for very much longer. I'm surprised he's flying under the radar for some people at the moment. He's had an incredible season. I'd be stunned if he was an All-Australian.
Yeah, he was. Well, he came 15th in the Coleman, kicking 40 goals for a small forward midfield. I mean, that's incredible.
That's ridiculous.
Well, when you think about
That's Ablett-like.
Yeah.
that is Ablett-like. When you think about the players that average 21 disposals a game and kick 40 goals in a season over the years, you look back, there's probably Ablett in 2010, there's Didak in 2010, there was, I think, Brent Harvey in 2009. It's a very, very small category for players who have done that, and Wingard already has, and he's got another final next week where he could end the season on 45 goals or something, which is ridiculous for a second-year player playing on half forward. It's unbelievable.
Well, a lot of people have made a lot of things about Collingwood's performance last night, but what struck me about Port Adelaide, I was surprised they got to 70% kicking efficiency, because they were pretty woeful with the ball, but their commitment, they chased, they tackled, they harassed, and there were a few, and people see Collingwood the way they counterattack. They counterattack quite well, and they move the ball. In previous years, when they're at the top of their game, okay, and they've had games towards the end of the season where it looks as if you get ball back, you get you get your core midfield back, and they looked better. But last night, just when you thought Collingwood were out of defence, Port would come and they wouldn't even lay a tackle. They'd just chase and they'd pressure Collingwood, and they only ran by 62% of foot, Collingwood, and it wasn't windy, it wasn't bad conditions or anything. So credit to Port Adelaide, because they, for a young team, stood up and applied the required pressure for a final.
I reckon, like, most people would have gone to that ground, obviously assuming, look, Port have made a final, that's fantastic. Collingwood really will probably win this. I reckon the only people who didn't, were the players and the coaches, because they went out and they believed, and that got them there, really. Like, there were very few who were backing him. You could see in most tipping, the only one who backed him in Herald Sun was the kiss of death, and that's never been. So, I mean, but that shows how much people were certain, and it just didn't occur.
I think it definitely came down to coaching last night. I think there was a few tactics. Port obviously were going hard at the ball. Monfries got in Heath Shaw's head, which was pretty...
He was fantastic last night.
Great, and Nathan Buckley for leaving Shaw on Monfries. What a moronic move.
Leaving Ben Reid up forward for the entire game when Jay Schultz was dominating and Reid was having no effect up forward.
It was interesting, because I saw before the game, Lockie Keefe was practicing shots on goal, and I was thinking, oh, okay, he's probably taking the piss. He'll probably start down back on someone like Justin Westhoff. I looked down, the siren's about to start, and I see Nick Maxwell standing next to Justin Westhoff, and Lockie Keefe's up forward. Keefe has about 8-10 disposals for the game. Reid has about that as many as well. And Westhoff, he was quite nullified, but he still kicked that opening goal. I think he set the tone early, and it was very interesting tactics by Nathan Buckley, leaving those three tools up forward when really they needed a bit of mobility.
They don't have a second tall forward. I know there's the solution to obviously throwing Reid down there, but they don't have a second tall forward. You can't, and I understand the rationale, and I understand Reid can go there and kick goals, but in games when you need to put your key players where they play their best football, or they're needed, and obviously Schultz got off the chain with some pretty good midfield delivery, you've got to put Reid back. You can't, and their forward structure was just all over the place. They clogged their own space, they played two talls deep, it was awful and just woeful, and it's sort of... partly why they lost.
Yeah, well, Cloak had two on him the entire time, and Reid and Keefe were just not spaced well enough, and it was often, the ball was getting kicked to Dane Swan. He ended up having 11 marks and 6 shots at goal, and
he had 8 marks inside 50. I mean, he was the only real forward who could find space. So, I mean, it says a lot about, the way Cloak and Reid and Keefe are going when Dane Swan's, your leading marking forward.
And it was interesting, Buckley subbing off Elliott instead of a tall. I thought that was crazy. Like,
I would have thought, it's either Reid or Keefe, just to give that forward line a bit more, I suppose, a bit more punch.
Well, I think Elliott was, I wouldn't say, he was pretty poor. He only had, 8 or so touches, 11 touches, sorry, but he was running at 45% efficiency. He had quite a few clangers. But, I think swapping him for Didak, like for like, understandable, but... yeah, definitely either Lockie Keefe or Ben Reid, because they're both having shockers.
Yeah, I think definitely players like... there was this passage of play in the third quarter when Collingwood sort of made that charge, and it was Broadbent versus Swan on the wing, and Broadbent attacked the ball and he won it. And obviously, I felt as if that was a sort of microcosm of the game. You had a side that you wouldn't think Broadbent, a player who's been at Port Adelaide for a while, and I think one of those players that definitely was underperforming under the previous coaches, and players like him and Westhoff, and I felt as if that they're finally rising to their potential, and that was the difference in the end, that Collingwood sort of, I don't want to say they took for granted or they thought they were the better team, but there was a lot of that in the way, their body language and the way they sort of didn't chase and they didn't tackle, and they weren't really paying attention to the big picture on the field.
Well, I thought that was fair enough, because even in Buckley's press conference, you sort of saw him sit there going, I can't believe I'm in this situation. So that was what I got from that.
Well, and I think even Buckley last week in the press conference after the North Melbourne game, he said, we weren't really interested in the result today. You're going into a final series, Bucks. You can't just sort of, it's 1 week, whatever. You sort of know, we lost. We've got to address a few things, because some of the things that happened last week against North happened last night. And you can't have that mindset going into a game, a final.
Yeah, there was almost the expectation that, even during the third quarter or something, that, the players are all thinking, okay, we're losing, but someone's going to do something. We're not a poor enough team to get rolled by a Port Adelaide who were 15th on the ladder last year in a home final with 55,000 supporters behind us. It's not going to happen, and all it did.
I think this could potentially be the wake-up call, because they've said they had a wake-up call throughout the season, but for once they've suddenly seen, hey, there's this developing team. Because let's face it, this time last year, if you had said next year Collingwood, who just went out in a prelim, would lose to a team that was labelled a basket case, then you would have been called crazy.
I'd say to Collingwood, they've got to look to what happened to Geelong in the first elimination final last year, because I felt that was their wake-up call. That was the moment where they said, okay, we're in a bit of a transitional phase, but there's a lot of things that we can improve on, and we can't just rest on, knowing that we have, a bit like Collingwood resting on, we have a Swan, Pendlebury, and Geelong resting on, we have Bartel and this and that. No, you've just got to go out there, and everyone's got to lift, even players that are fringe players. And they've done that this year, Geelong, to their credit.
And, the most important thing is that they do have this squad that, people rated as top 4 calibre. It's probably one of the best midfielders in the competition on face value. You got Swan, Pendlebury, Beams, Ball. There's very good players there. You got Grundy, who's, been fantastic in the ruck, probably matched Matthew Lobby last night, who's been in incredible form himself. And, you got All-Australian and Ben Reid, who's playing forward and back. You got Travis Cloak, you got Lockie Keefe, who are all playing well. And, you got a very, very good list there. And, I think they'll be back in the same position next year, if not better.
And another team that probably, as we were mentioning, has had the same sort of transition as Geelong. And they sort of came under the same scrutiny. They got their home final and then couldn't deliver, much to the disappointment of the Geelong Advertiser.
I felt as if yesterday was a result that sort of showed that, especially this season, that you're not, even if you're the better team going in, you're not necessarily going to win. And I know that's, it's whoever was better on the day. It's that cliche in football, but usually it's not. A side can play at 80, 70%, and they can still get over the line. And usually in final series past the class, but the top 2 teams, and then there's the rest. Especially in the last, I felt, 4 or 5 years. But I think Geelong, yesterday, they only played at 80%. Geelong, Freo got under the skin of their players. They were sucked in. And that fight back in the second quarter was just based around getting in their heads. A few players were knocked over off the ball. There was always mouthing off at players during stoppages, and they just got in their heads. And Geelong, it changed the way they played, because it was one passage of play where they had the ball on the wing, and Geelong, they don't like going long. They like to measure their passes and find targets. They had 2 loose players in midfield, and I assure you, if they found that target, and if they're, I can't remember who had the ball, but if they looked wide enough, they would have saw them in midfield, and they would have passed the ball, and they would have had direct inside 50. Instead of that, they just went long. Geelong never go long over the top inside 50. It was marked by Zach Dawson, and that was Fremantle shook them. It shook their concentration, and they were just thrown off the game.
think you can say a lot about Ross Lyon and how he's instilled a defensive culture in Freo. I mean, McFarlane came back yesterday. Obviously, probably wasn't quite ready for it, but he'll be better for the run. But for the 5 best guys on the ground for me for Freo were Lee Spur, Michael Barlow, Sandilands, Fife, and Crowley. And 3 of those, Lee Spur, traditionally a defensive player, but he was absolutely fantastic going both ways. Aaron Sandilands took a few game-saving marks late when they really needed him, and Ryan Crowley. Stevie J was he was running off the chain at the start, had something like 12 disposals in the first quarter, 2 goals. After Crowley went to him, he only had another 10 or so touches for the rest of the game, and that really turned it on its head.
Yeah, Crowley spent about 70 minutes on Johnson after quarter time, or so I suppose during the first quarter it happened, and Johnson had 9 disposals, 2 goals before that, and for the time Crowley spent on him, he had about 7 disposals, so again, he really got under his skin. Johnson is a player who likes to mouth off. He knows that Cardinia Park is normally a fortress, and it's a place where he can mouth off right at the start of the game because he knows that 99% of the time Geelong are going to end up winning, and he's right in doing so. And even after the siren, he was almost confused. He was still mouthing off at Crowley. I think Selwood was getting involved a little bit. I think he was frustrated himself, which is something unusual for a player in good as form as Selwood. And it says a lot about the game. The Crowley-Johnson matchup, again, a bit of a microcosm of the game itself.
They sucked them in, and the last 2 wins Fremantle have had over Geelong, there was that game, obviously the final last year, and then there was that game, round 1, I think it was at Patterson's, and they just got in their heads, and no one, obviously, Geelong coming off a flag, and people didn't expect, an upset, but Fremantle, they got in their heads, and if that's something, and because I feel as if Hawthorn can learn from what Fremantle did yesterday. If Hawthorn want to beat Geelong, they need to get in their heads, because Geelong are a side that do get distracted easy. For a side that is physically and really psychologically imposing, they do get sucked in easy, and when you can let them know that, you're slipping, and you just keep at it, you can get the result you're after.
Well, it's quite interesting. I wonder what kind of difference it would make at the MCG if these two were to very realistically play off in 3 weeks.
Yes, that's a good point. What do you guys see? Obviously, I'm not sure of the exact size difference between that and Simmons, but how much of a part would it play if they played at the MCG?
Oh, the MCG is considerably wider. I think Simmons is about 110 across and MCG is 140. So there's plenty of space. I mean, even Geelong were kicking it out in the full yesterday. I mean, I think they were noting on the commentary before the game, there are a lot of kicks from the opposition that, on other grounds, they would expect, they would land in 5 metres inside the boundary line, they would just spill and, there'd be a throw-in, and all of a sudden, you're playing at Simmons and they're out at the full. I don't think there will be that fact at the MCG. I think Freo play it fairly well, besides that Richmond game last year, and they have that finals record last year. They've beaten Geelong in Melbourne, and I think, their slogan, their mantra that they're kind of going on anytime, anywhere, or whatever it is, I think, they're really starting to live up to that, and I think they'd almost start favourites for that.
Yeah. Well, that would be quite an interesting sort of match, I guess, in many ways. But Geelong, if they can't get up for a grand final, should those two meet, then there's something seriously wrong. It's tough to see, but I think Geelong versus Port next week will be very interesting.
It will be interesting. I think Matthew Lobby will absolutely dominate them in the ruck and in the middle, which will be a pretty important battle, because yesterday Blitzarves had 7 hit-outs, Vardy 6. I think Josh Walker had a couple, but between Sandilands and Clark, they had 50 between them, and that was absolutely huge. I think Trent West was missing yesterday, and Hawkins as well, who can occasionally pinch hit. Something's got to be done down there.
Yeah, I was wanting to touch on that at about halfway through the first quarter. I think Sandilands and Clark really switched on. Since that point, Freo had 48 hit-outs to Geelong's 12 and 17 hit-outs to Geelong's 2 straight to advantage, which is, straight down the throats of players like Barlow, who, he was fantastic, Nathan Fife, and, for looking at that point again, players like Mundy, Hill, Neal, Barlow, a lot of those players that, need good ruck service down their throats so they can actually run and spread through the centre. you know, they dominated after about that point during the first quarter. You know, they really did turn it on. I think, you know, combined, I think it was Barlow, Fifield, Mundy, Neil, Pearce in the middle. They had 7 disposals before that point and 130 after. Which is, you know, that's 6 players who have absolutely turned it on.
And on 2 of those players, especially Spur and Neil, there was a criticism of Ross Lyon at St Kilda, and that was he couldn't develop young players. Now, I think one of them, Spur, is mature age, yes.
He's about 25, I think.
Yeah, but, yeah, players that come on under Ross Lyon, there wasn't much of that. That was the criticism, that he'd just have a core team, which was a pretty good St Kilda core team, and he sort of implemented a game style which took them to 2 grand finals. If he can, and obviously we've seen here, Spur and Neil, I feel as if one more season and they can become, on top of already what is a very good core midfield, incredible footballers. And if Ross Lyon makes, and I know there's certain coaches who, I think most coaches, the next time round when they do get another go, they make changes. And if developing youngsters is something Ross Lyon can do, he did it with the ruckman. I can't remember his name off the top of the head. The Freo ruckman. He played during the season. He got some games.
Griffin.
Hanneth, Jack Hanneth. Yeah, he's giving game time to young players. And he didn't do that at St Kilda. But now, if he can add that another aspect or dynamic to his coaching tools, and that's developing young players, he can not only a team needs to be close to its window for Ross Lyon to coach. Ross Lyon can build his own list again. You know, it adds another dimension.
Well, yeah, as you said, there's a lot of players that are actually very young that are coming on under Ross Lyon. You know, Neil is 20 years old. He's been averaging about 25 disposals a game for the past month or 2. There's a lot of others. You know, about half their best side, I would say, is under 24. You know, there's players like even Chris Maiden and Ballantyne. You know, they're 23 years old, and they've found some very fine form under Ross Lyon. So, you know, it really has gone against what has happened at St Kilda, where he failed to develop youngsters. You know, there's not very many players from that 2006 to 2010 drafts, I don't think, still at St Kilda. So he's done very well in that aspect and, you know, fixing that up. But we're going to go some sim messages. We'll be back with the Hawthorn Swans game after this.
Every student learns differently. Oral learners, for example, are sensitive to background noises, which can become very distracting. Enroll in a teaching degree that equips you with an understanding of different learning styles. Shh! And you'll be able to address your students' special needs. The Master of Teaching from the University of Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Teaching to inspire. Visit masterofteachingmelbourne.edu.au to find out more. Sponsoring SYN.
If you went up for Get Cereal this week, this is what you missed.
Get Cereal's youngest contributor, Damien, who is my little brother, gorgeous little soul. Our executive producer sent me on a mission to get him to record a segment about farts, but he refused to do it because he has dignity. And instead, he wanted to talk about the Father's Day that he just experienced.
Hi everyone, my name is Damien Kuna, and I'm here to talk about Father's Day and what I did, and I hope you did a good thing for your father. If I was a dad, I would rent a racing car because then I can play with the racing car. Yes! Bye-bye. I'm Damien Kuna.
Get excited.
Get happy.
Get Cereal!
6 to 9 a.m. weekdays only on SYN.
Dear Naughty Rude, I love my boyfriend, but he has this weird thing when he's getting close. He bleats like a sheep. The problem is, I'm a vegetarian. Should I be worried?
Got a burning question?
Stalk us on Facebook.
Why don't you email us? What about texting us in?
Text us on the email and we'll call.
Sunday, 8 to 10 p.m.
The Naughty Rude Show.
This is SYN Radio.
This is SYN Radio. If you went up for Get Cereal this week, this is what you missed.
Could you rap? You're listening to Get Cereal with Taylor, Rez and Charlie.
You're listening to Get Cereal with Taylor, Rez and Charlie. Have a good day.
I got water ballooned once. You're nuts.
Yeah.
And it leaves a giant wet patch, which is not good. The water balloon didn't even explode. Now that's some good material.
Get up.
Get excited.
Get happy.
Get Cereal!
6 to 9 a.m. weekdays only on SYN.
A side quest is an optional section of a video game and is commonly found in role-playing games.
It is a smaller mission within a larger storyline and can be used as a means to provide non-linear structures to an otherwise linear plot.
As a general rule, the completion of side quests are not essential for the game to be finished, but can bring various benefits to the player characters.
Also non-essential but highly awesome is side quests and Sin.
So tune in Fridays at 11 PM to hear SideQuest, Sin's home of indie and retro gaming.
Here on Bound for Glory on Sin, text us in on 0427 767 767 to chat all about AFL. We're going to be discussing Hawthorn and Sydney on Friday night. Hawks getting up over the top 105 to 51 in what was a bit of a surprise considering they were level at half-time.
Yeah, it was a pretty terrible game after half-time, I think it's fair to say. It was played on a bit on Sydney's terms early because it was tight and contested, and I thought, well, this will be quite interesting coming into the second half to see which team can run away, try and get a bit more of their play happening, but it just never really happened. Like, Hawthorn just got away and just killed them. The amount of times that Roughhead was just free or the space in front of him was just open, it was ridiculous. And it was very un-Sydney-like. They were able to say Roughhead would mark, say, 55, 60 out, and the amount of times he found someone 30 metres out, standing there waiting, it was, yeah, very, very un-Sydney-like, I felt.
I felt as if they just went in too tall. There was too many tall players, and there was, I felt as if zero forward pressure, ground level. Hawthorn sort of just moved the ball out with ease. I think the marks tally was something like 115 to 40 something. It was.
It's one of the. I think it's the lowest marks anyone's had in a non-wet game this year.
Yeah, it was a total obliteration. Hawthorn controlled the ball. They controlled the game, and they were just happy to go wide and spread Sydney, and they weren't going to give too much chase. Sydney just played too many tall players, and I think they've got to cut some. They've got to cut some going into next week because the structure falls down, this sprinting and trying to hold the ball in when you haven't got players who can get to the contest because they're just too big.
Well, who do they cut? That's the thing. I mean, you got players like Pike and Mumford, which has been a very good combination in the ruck. You got Kurt Tippett up forward, who's been, he's kicked 33 goals in 10 games or whatever it is. He's been fantastic. Who do you cut?
Jesse White.
Jesse White, yeah.
Yeah.
Although he did step around Luke Hodge. That was one of the funniest things I've seen. That's almost about time for Hodge to pull up, retire, I think. When Jesse White's able to step around you and turn you inside out, it's probably time to call it a day.
The thing is, Hawthorn also have quite a tall, forward line, but they did it quite well. I think Spanger, he's not as tall, and Gunston definitely he's more agile. Same with Roughhead. So I think with the three guys, especially when Pike, Tippett, and White were all playing in the same forward line, it was way too much lumbering guys.
I think it was the way that Hawthorn's played a bit all years. They haven't really got this standout midfield. They haven't got a very standout centre line. There's Mitchell, there's Hodge, there's Sewell, and after that there really isn't. Like you see, like at Collingwood or something, that fourth midfield would be Luke Ball, or it'll be Steele Sidebottom. At Hawthorn, it's probably someone like I don't know, Brendan Whitecross or something who was good on the night. He's probably there. They got a lot of players that rotate through that midfield. That's the thing. Hawthorn got everybody involved. I think they had about 3 players who had 11 disposals or less compared to Sydney's 11. They had all their side involved. They were absolutely fantastic at, maintaining the ball. They were very patient with their disposal. They would chip it around until they could find an option, and it was a very impressive performance under, a very intense final, especially with what Sydney throws up.
It's incredibly disappointing from Sydney's point of view that they allowed Hawthorn to control the ball the way they did. That's not the Sydney that we've come to know. It's a side that applies pressure, especially in a final. I don't think you just can't allow the opposition to have that much control of the ball and expect to get a result from it. It was incredibly poor by the Swans.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would have to be one of, if not comfortably, the worst performance they've had this year, and for a while, really, considering the stakes that were up for offer.
They had a game against Richmond last year, which they got rolled. I think that would be probably their last bad game on this scale. Because it was just dreadful on Friday night.
What was the biggest thing, I think, in terms of the loss was definitely the defending. In the back half, Hawks had 20 marks inside 50, and a lot of it were...
That's very un-Sydney-like.
Exactly, and it wasn't even contested marks. They only had 7 contested marks for the whole game, and the highest was Shields with 2. No one else had multiple. But a lot of it was uncontested stuff. Jack Gunston just worked his ass off. Same with blokes like Roughhead, and they were able to find space. Getting 2 or 3 metres on their opponent. And a lot of the guys you expect to have great games. Your Nick Smiths, your Andreas Everett's, just to absolutely keep their players quiet. Dane Rampy as well. Yeah,
didn't have a disposal after half-time. Dane Rampy.
No, he was barely sighted for the game.
Yeah, I think it says a lot about the way Hawthorn's forwards performed, and again, it goes down to this patience aspect, which is, the resilience and, to keep persisting, to keep leading, to keep trying to find space in that forward line. And we know there's so many forwards down there, and it's a very remarkable effort from Hawthorn.
And if you're Sydney, would you rather play Richmond or Carlton?
Carlton.
Yeah, I think anyone would rather play Carlton. I think they wouldn't mind playing Richmond either. I don't think Richmond play the SCG too well, I just at the moment. But I think anyone would rather play Carlton from what we've seen of Carlton, especially in that last 5-6 games. They're a side that can get big scores kicked against them real quickly. Like they can bleed 5-6 goals in an instant.
15 of Sydney's players went less than 5 disposals in the last quarter, and a lot of them were guys who you expect to be damaging. Your Gary Rowans, Dan Hanbury, Ben McGlynn, 3 of their guys that are better forward of centre. They were absolutely nothing. 5 disposals between them in the last quarter.
I don't think Dan Hanbury was 100% fit, honestly. And, he was coming off that knee injury he had against Geelong 2 weeks ago. It looked quite bad. He missed last week, and he came back this week, and for a player of his calibre to only have 13 disposals, I think, I don't think that's normal. I don't think, he wasn't really tagged. There wasn't an immediate direct opponent, following him around the ground for 120 minutes. So, it says a lot about the way. I don't think he was 100% fit, really, because I think, a player of his capabilities doesn't play 80% of the game and have 13 touches. So it's just not Dan Hanbury.
I'm probably looking a bit ahead here, but where do Sydney go from here? Because you've got a side that obviously does have players under an injury cloud. Next week they'll play probably Richmond, because I don't think many people expect Carlton to get up, but we'll talk about that later. They'll win that. Then they have to go to Perth.
They won't win that. Not
They've got to beat the Dockers, and they had that contest at the SCG where they're up by 4 goals. They lost their concentration a bit, and obviously the drawn result. Is there any circumstance that they can not only turn it around, but play better than they've been playing this year? Because I felt they haven't reached the heights that they are capable of. Is there any way that they can produce that in the last 3 weeks of the season to get to that grand final? Because we all know that, looking at that list, that their window's open, and it's a fantastic side when it's up and running. Nearly unbeatable on the day, because they're just that tough and hard and resilient. But what needs to change?
Well, I think first off, as we were discussing before, cut the tools, get rid of Jesse White, or one of them at least, and get a little bit more run. Make sure when you're going into the forward line, if you're going to kick it to tip it, make sure you get it in quickly so the opposition doesn't have time to set up their defensive structure.
I know we've said cut the tools a fair bit for Sydney because they have lacked a lot of mobility, through the centre and up forward. What happens when Adam Goods is declared fit, in the event he's declared fit for 2 weeks to play Freo in Perth? Then
play him as a midfielder, I guess.
You play him through the centre?
I would. You've got your forward line with Tippett. You don't really need him up forward.
Yeah, well, it does depend who's available, obviously, but as you said, he can play forward, and you could probably replace him straight up for Jesse White as well as an option. But you'd have to play him. You play your best players regardless. If he's fit, he plays. So.
Well, that's the thing. They are playing their best players at the moment. I think they're in a form slump at the moment. I think they just got to persist with it because we know they've got a fantastic squad. They've got Hanbury, Jack, Kennedy, McVeigh. This is a very potent midfield when they're all going.
And probably the best contested midfield in the league, I reckon.
Oh, comfortably.
For sure. Probably Bulldogs are second, which is funny.
And if it's any game that's going to... excuse me. If it's any game where that strength is going to help them, it's that preliminary final that they're going to probably have to go play in Perth against Fremantle. And that's their best asset. That game is probably going to be played in a very... I don't know, I'm looking ahead and we shouldn't do that, but I'm pretty confident the Swans will get to that prelim, and it's going to suit them in that condition, that ground.
That hostile
environment. Sydney play well when they got their backs against the wall.
How good would it be to have those, if they play at their best, them and Fremantle with their defensive pressures, both sides, who are known for their real intense defensive pressures, and then potentially on the other side you've got Hawthorn and Geelong, who, well, you don't need to even introduce.
It's almost all out attack.
Yeah.
I mean, you got two very good defences, but all out attack.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I think just on that note, we should move to just some reviews of some team seasons. The bottom 7 sides that we'll look at these teams first, and more obviously as the finals progress, we'll go through the other teams as they move out. But we'll start with GWS. Sheedy's moving on. What do we expect? Obviously, from what we saw from this season, but moving forward under Leon Cameron, where's he going to take this squad? What is his first priorities going to be?
Well, just make sure you keep consolidating the youth. Jeremy Cameron ended up taking the best and fairest out last night, so you've got the quality there already. He's just got to make sure that the players don't get too worn out during the season.
Jeremy Cameron could win the Coleman next year, legitimately.
Well, he could have won it this year.
Yeah, I know, that's the thing. He could legitimately win it next year, I reckon.
I think I don't think exactly their midfield is their biggest problem at the moment, but when you've got a midfield that's that consistently delivers the ball and puts it in the right places, because there was a lot of goals Cameron kicked where he was running onto it, or he was having to double back or to take a mark, and there was a lot of opportunities where his teammates missed him and they didn't hit the target. Once his teammates start hitting the target, he's going to kick many more goals.
And if you think about it, he would benefit from that more than nearly any other forward. Almost the missed kicks, in a way, almost help him, because he's that athletic kind of key forward. So all the missed kicks, he's able to run around, where if it's a one-on-one contest, even if they sort of put it to advantage, that probably disadvantages him more than if they kick it in front of him or make him move round, because very few defenders can stick with him.
Do you think they have an issue defensively?
Yeah. Yes.
GWS, as in key defenders or short defenders?
Yeah.
Oh, both.
Yeah, everything. I'd be drafting quite a few.
Drafting,
defenders.
or would you be trading?
Well, you'd want to trade in, maybe even if you can get one just temporarily. They need a defender desperately.
Well, they got players like Phil Davis and Josh Bruce, who are they're probably best 2 key defenders at the moment. And Phil Davis, he's probably best off as a third tall. I think you shouldn't be taking the best or second best forward every single week. They brought in Stephen Gillum. That didn't really work. I mean, he played a couple of good games, but he played probably more poor games than good games. And Josh Bruce, he had a very good season. He's that sort of a bit athletic, key defender. He's 196 centimetres and he's got a bit of mobility about him, so he played quite well. But these are very, very raw players, and I think they've got to push very hard to try and they got high picks, I suppose. They'll have pick 9 or pick 10, and they'll have pick 19 or 20 as well to follow that up. So it's and of course pick 1. So they got very good currency on the table in terms of draft picks, and they throw them around, try and shop a key defender.
Yeah, I reckon Essendon's probably their first port of call, knocking on them, because obviously they need picks and GWS need players. So,
do you think they'll target someone like Tate Pears?
I don't think Tate Pears fills the criteria.
He doesn't fit the monster that they need.
He's sort of that third tall as well. I don't think he's a player that will take the best forward if you need him to. If you try and line him up on someone like, I don't know, Josh Kennedy, he can't do that. He's too slight and he tries to break off his man too much, and Kennedy will just monster him.
Yeah.
I think we'll move on. Melbourne, obviously, this week signing Paul Roos, a great step forward, and good on the Melbourne Football Club for making a decision that I feel will pay off. This is the one that has to pay off.
Yeah.
Because if this doesn't pay off, you're in massive trouble.
You hope that he can turn it around, because you don't have to go back too far. I know it's a different situation and they had the same problems, but Dennis Pagan rings a bell. I know Carlton had a lot of, draft picks taken away and all this kind of thing, so they were probably in deeper hot water.
If I had to compare, I'd probably compare it to when Malthouse went to Collingwood, because obviously Collingwood had deep structural issues. They had obviously financial issues in '99, but obviously he needs to. Paul Roos, just like Malthouse, needs to come in when he went to Collingwood and say, okay, this is the list. This is what we're going to do with it. This is the football department. This is what we're going to do with it. I'm going to need help from upstairs, and this is something that I feel Melbourne coaches haven't had. I felt as if Bailey, Neil, they haven't had the assistance from upstairs that's required. There hasn't been a proper relationship and a professional relationship, and that's something that needs to be fostered. I think Jackson is also the correct CEO, just quickly on off-field matters. He'll be the one to deliver. I think they're also going to get a new sponsor, be announced in the next week or so. So it's small steps, but they're required steps.
Well, if you compare them, it means Melbourne will be in a grand final in 3 years.
Maybe not.
One can dream.
One can dream, but I don't think so. No, yeah. I think it'll be 5-6 years before, at minimum, if that was to take place. But if they start now, they can definitely, I feel, push finals in... it would be incredibly if they got in 2015 finals. Incredibly out there. But 2016, definitely if they start now and they make those changes now.
Well, if they get the compensation pick, let's say it's mid first round, for example.
They'll get that pick.
If they get the mid first round, do you take a chance on Boyd if he's there and then take a midfielder with the next pick?
Absolutely. For sure.
Because you look, Boyd, Hogan, if you have Dawes as a third forward, he's a solid
Mitch
third
Clark
forward.
And Jack Fitzpatrick as well.
Yeah,
that's 5 key forwards, and Mitch Clark's on a long contract, I believe.
He was signed for a while. It was a long deal. It was 4 years, I think, when he first got signed up. So, well, that depends on if he gets back from his injury, I suppose.
Yeah. Well,
so you're going to have 5 tall forwards, and I feel as if obviously Fitzpatrick is the lesser of those, but obviously he's still young. And you're going to have 5 of them if you go, obviously, the Boyd route. I actually think Melbourne should pass up on Boyd. I think they should target midfielders because their midfield it's woeful. And if they are to fix... Because I feel at both ends they've got definitely keys to work with. And they've got some nice flankers they've got there. But you've got to target the midfield and you've got to fix that. There are some players that they're targeting right now. Scott Selwood is from West Coast. He's one of on their list. Rory Sloane is another one. I don't think he'll come home, but there's obviously between his management and the Adelaide Football Club, they're sort of not on the same page at the moment, but I expect that to get cleared up. And they're also targeting Taylor Adams from GWS. Obviously,
I think everyone is at the moment.
Yeah, the football department has noticed. Okay, and that's the first step, noticing where the problem is. Now they know where the problem is, and they've just got to fix it now.
Well, we know that their forward line is very good. We know that the back line is very good. Well, at least comparatively to their midfield.
Well, it's a back line that's always been under pressure because the midfield's garbage. And there's no help.
Yeah,
exactly.
Frawley and Garland are two very good defenders.
Yeah,
really,
the amount of times I've seen Colin Garland yelling at the midfielders, going, "Where were you? Where was the defensive effort?" As soon as he gets outplayed. I lost count very quickly. And again, he was very close second to the best and fairest. And he conceded probably near the most goals of any key defender this year. I mean, it just shows how many contests he's had to face constantly.
And like this, like most people, you got to feel sorry for Nathan Jones, really, because he busts the gut every single week, and some weeks he's the only one doing it. So, he needs help, basically.
Yeah, and that's it, help. That's all they need. And obviously there's Viney there, who... he'll be a very good player, we're just not sure how good he'll be. It's another one, but there's help because I just feel there's a lot of C graders on that list that they've picked up, and they did have good seasons, but players like Magna, who obviously didn't get game time this year, but he got game time last year, and they got a lot of these players that were mature age-ish, but they just weren't going to develop into gun footballers. What they need is gun footballers. And obviously you can't throw kids in the middle straight away. Those C graders are going to have to stay on for the next 2 years. But once that happens, those gun midfielders need to be put in, and hopefully that's what's going to happen with them.
Well, it says a lot when someone like Matt Jones walks in and averages 21 disposals a game, finishes top 4 in the best and fairest. You know,
him, Clisby, those sort of players.
Yeah, well, it says a lot about, the way that players like Colin Sylvia, Geordie McKenzie, I suppose Jimmy Tompus to some extent, the way they've played, that, a 23-year-old from, Box Hill Hawks has just walked in and bested them all with no AFL experience.
And yeah, I think that is the case with the younger, like the smaller, lower teams. The fact that VFL and Sandford players can walk in and impress. And I think that another one like that is Tom Lee over at St Kilda, who obviously they're the next team in line. Obviously they tried to fix their forward line issues through the draft last year with Spencer White and then trading for Tom Lee. How successful have we seen that?
I think they're a side that a lot of people have split opinion on where St Kilda will go in the next year. There's obviously I felt as if this season that they only got blown out of the water once or twice. Other than that, they put in effort. They didn't get the result they were after, but the effort was there. Now, obviously there's going to be a period. They've lost something in the vicinity of 700 games of experience. Obviously, Cozzy didn't play that often, but Milne and Blake did.
Yeah, Milne will be the big one that hurts, because he's good for at least a goal every game.
One or two.
Yeah.
He was still, in his last season, not prolific, but he was assigned a role and he still played it. Jason Blake is another player who you just see the St Kilda squad and you automatically think Blake, defence, And that's something that obviously they've got to fix. I'm not sure who can come in to replace him. I think forward line wise, they're going to be a club that cannot pass on Boyd. If that that situation arises, they cannot pass on Boyd.
Yeah.
Because
Rewalt won't be there for much longer. Let's face it.
Yeah.
He's probably got 1 or 2 years left with his, his knee problem hasn't really affected him too much so far, but it's probably going to catch up in him at some point. And, if you're going to be left with Tom Lee as your only forward, and Spencer White, who he's been okay in the VFL, but he hasn't cracked through for that Sydney game just yet. I think they've got to get Boyd.
Could they legitimately win the Wooden Spoon next year?
I think
yeah, they could, but it's not a Wooden Spoon where they were belted out of the water every week because they were uncompetitive, because there's still a side that competes. There's been suggestions that Del Santo may move on. That means another midfield player needs to stand up. I think Armitage is definitely one player who I feel that he needs to... He's 23 now. He's got to make the jump.
25.
25, is he?
Yeah.
Apologies about that. I wasn't sure how old he was. I remember writing an article, I think 2 years ago, about Armitage saying he needs to move up if they're going to rotate through these midfield players. And he's definitely one of them who's in that age bracket now where you've got to stand up.
Well, he was a pick 9 in that, I think, the 2006 draft. And he's in that age bracket now where a top pick really should be blossoming. And I think, it's the sort of development we're seeing from Jack Stephen, who smashed the best and fairest, a couple of days ago. And Armitage should be at that point. He really should be. He's a player who really has the strength to burst through a pack, and he's got good disposal. He's got good judgment, and he keeps running. So, he's a very good player. He really hasn't come on, and he needs to next year. Otherwise, it's not looking very good.
And another team that probably desperately needs to find another forward option, although they improved towards the end of the season, is the Western Bulldogs, because we all know, we've spoken about their contested midfield. They're one of the best in the league, despite being, bottom. Down the bottom. They did win the 8 games, which was fantastic. I said earlier in the year that a good season would be 8 wins, and they managed to get it done. They beat quite a few good teams as well in the end. Not great teams, but solid middle-of-the-road teams that you wouldn't have expected them to.
Yeah, I think... I'm just not sure where they'll finish next year. I just feel as if we need to see their first half of the season to get a wider... Because we don't know whether that... because a lot of... With young players and a young list, they'll play 10 good games, and then there'll be another 10, 15 where they're not as good, and they'll fall in and out of the team, and they're still working on that. And they might, next year, people say, oh, Dogs might be pushing for finals. No, I don't think they'll push for finals. Now, I'm happy to be wrong, but I feel as if they're just going to go through this phase where they'll probably get another 8, 9 wins next year, and they're still working on who's going to fit in this best 22. But there are fantastic signs, and there's a fantastic young group, and I feel as if that they've drafted, and so far their list management has been pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, they picked up Stringer and McRae last year, and they've both proven, although Stringer obviously didn't get as many games towards the end of the season, but they've both shown some really good signs, obviously, up forward and everything. But if you're talking about young players, there isn't much better than the Suns, who unveiled O'Meara this year, and he's won the Rising Star, obviously. So
third and the best and fairest as well.
Yeah, he's just a super player. So
yeah, he's brilliant.
He'll be the reason that Ablett, when he gets into his very latter stages, can pretty much play mostly up forward and kick 5 goals a game, and then ridiculously beat teams off his own boot that way. So
yeah, it's sort of, I think, unfair for GWS that there's this yardstick out there that's obviously had Ablett around it, but I think they've drafted a core midfield better than GWS have. I think they've got a better quality of player that they've picked up. Now, that's obviously, I don't want to be unfair on those young GWS players like Caniglio and stuff like that, because they're going to be fantastic footballers, but players like, and obviously they're going to get Jack Martin as well playing next year.
That's ridiculous.
So they're going to have a midfield which is going to be so far and above what other midfields are going to be in a while. We're going to have the heyday, the West Coast heyday of Kerr, Cousins, that sort of ilk.
Yeah,
is going to come again, but for the Suns.
Yeah, when you think of players like Ablett, Prestia, O'Meara, Bennell, who else is there? There's a lot. When you think of those players, once they're 24, 25 years old, or besides Ablett, that's deadly. Yeah. I mean, they've already torn games apart this year. I think Prestia's already had 1 or 2 40 disposal games. Bennell last year was brilliant. It's a very, very dangerous midfield already.
And speaking of the West Coast midfield from latter day, they've had some issues this year. Obviously, they obviously underperformed. A lot of people had them for the flag this year, and they ended up not even making the finals. So, what do we make of West Coast? Where do they go from here?
Disappointing, but they've got the list to be able to be around that sort of 10th to 8th spot next year.
Well, they need depth. I think we've covered this a fair bit on the show, is that they need depth. Once their players get injured, and I mean over the last couple of years they have had their fair share of injuries, there's no one immediately coming up to replace them. I think they can address that in the draft. They've got pick 6, which that's going to get them a very good quality kid, and once the players that are coming out, the players like your Brad Dalziels and your Ash Smiths are being replaced with, I don't know, for example, whoever pick 6 will be in the draft. Once it's that player coming in that's replacing these top line players that are getting injured, West Coast all of a sudden look a lot better. That they have a much better squad than 13th, and I think Worsfold out. I think Scott Burns will rejuvenate the place a little bit. I think Worsfold was getting probably a little bit tired, I think, towards the end of the year especially, and I think Burns, he's a very good coach. He's very well regarded over in Perth, and he'll be very good for West Coast, I think. And
I think the last one that we're going to discuss today is Brisbane. Obviously, they've had their change of coach as well. Almost made the finals, which would have been hilarious. Fell 1 point short of Geelong, so obviously, I know Geelong, you could say they weren't playing at full best, which is fair enough on the day, but Brisbane have shown throughout the year that they're willing to compete. They do have a core midfield that's really good. They're probably lacking that forward target, especially with Jonathan Brown, who's on his last legs.
Yeah, now obviously it's a risky play, but they'd be one of the teams that should make a play for Boyd. Yeah. Obviously you'd need to sacrifice an incredibly good footballer to do that, to have a shot.
Well, they'll have pick 7 plus someone.
Yeah, it's a play that they'll need to make if they want Boyd, and it's either that or they go down the alternative forward path, and they'd be targeting someone like a Jesse White, or maybe another sort of third talented
footballer. I'd target Jesse White
over the Boyd.
Oh, not over Boyd. No.
No, as in, no, not over Boyd. Yeah. But if you're faced with the choice of sacrificing someone like a Redden plus pick 7 and Jesse White, which one would you take?
I think White will come cheaper. That's the thing. I wouldn't sacrifice Jack Redden for.
Yeah.
Well, the players seemingly look like there's going to be a few on the move. You might as well, get rid of them to try and get back.
So you're in the after Boyd camp?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, if you trade pick 7 from Jack Redden for Jesse White, I'm pretty sure you will not be allowed back in Queensland. No.
I think they got
that's called bringing the game to disrepute.
Yeah. I think they've got rid of Vossi, so they're not going to have that problem.
Legitimately,
Crazy Vossi.
Legitimately, though, I don't think you could package up too many players. Like, they're not... GWS aren't stupid. They're not going to give you pick 1 for a couple of players and pick 7, surely. Like, I mean, Karnisis, reportedly wants to go home. Pollock wants to go to South Australia. None of them want to go to Western Sydney, so...
Well, it's got to be an executive decision. If you're going to target pick 1, it has to be someone like a Redden and pick 7, because that's the only way it's going to get over the line. I think we should move on. The first... Well, obviously they play them in reverse order nowadays, but the first elimination final between Richmond and Carlton at the MCG, two old foes going at it. Where do we see this... Do we see another upset, or do we see the status quo restored?
I think we see a close game. I think we see a Richmond that, it's hard to see how they'll approach today. I mean, it's their first final in 12 years. We know they're a very polished and very damaging side on their day, but again, I think against a Carlton who have their finals experience, they're not, they've been there for 3 of the last 4 years, I think. Again, against Carlton at 90,000 at the G, it's something that Richmond haven't faced before. It's something they haven't faced for a long time. I don't think anyone on the list has faced it. So it's going to be interesting to see how they approach it.
For me, it comes down to Henderson versus Troy Chaplin. Troy Chaplin has lost only 13% of his defensive one-on-one contests this year, second in the top 50 in defensive contests. So that's ridiculous. I think Henderson's been in good form, and you've got to also consider you've got to look after Rewalt, Vickery, and Aaron Edwards. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
I think, and I'm just going to be straight up, Carlton are going to do one thing, and that's get the ball. They're ranked 16th. No, and I'm being serious. They're ranked 16th averages for disposals this season. You can't be that sort of side willing to concede that much possession and expect a result, because I feel as if they're not a strong enough rebounding team to do that. Geelong can afford to do that because they're a strong rebounding side. Sydney can afford to do that because they move the ball well from defence. I don't think Carlton do that. They've got to go in there, and their midfield players, especially Murphy and Gibbs, need to stand up. This is... We keep saying this again and again and again, and Murphy has played obviously a couple of good seasons, but he's sort of wavered in between performances this season which are acceptable and unacceptable, and there's no other day like today where they need their ball use, and it needs to be under pressure as well. They're going to be on the big stage, and it's now or never for, I feel, those sort of players.
Well, they're one of the best contested sides in the league, and often when they do win a contested ball, they do win the games. So, I mean, if players like Murphy and, I suppose, Bryce Gibbs and Brock McLean and Chris Chad on the way back, they can scare this Richmond midfield. They go up to Trent Cotchin and Brett Delidio and Dustin Martin. They say, you're in finals. This is a whole new game. This is something you've never played before. It becomes a whole different environment. We've seen Dustin Martin has been shut out of the game before by Zach Toohey, and I think, Toohey's got the capabilities to do it again. Trent Cotchin can get shut out. Brett Delidio is susceptible to a tag. Once you apply the heat to these players, they are very susceptible, and they can go into their shells a little bit, and I think, that is exactly what Carlton needs to do.
I was going to say, Richmond could probably retort with, well, what have you done in finals? You've had one finals win in the decade. Well,
they've played them. They know what playing finals is like.
They may have lost, but they're aware of what's required on the day.
Richmond need to be accountable in the forward half. Andrew Walker, Kate Simpson, Bryce Gibbs, Heath Scotland, Zach Toohey, all pretty dangerous with the ball in hands. And you look at their small forwards there. There's not a lot of guys that are playing the shutdown role. There are a lot of more potent guys. So it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah. So who are you guys going with? It seems as if a straightforward result but we thought about that with the games yesterday. How and do you think Carlton, quickly everyone on the panel,
I think Carlton.
Who and why?
Carlton.
Sorry, you go.
Carlton, because they have the finals experience. They've beaten Richmond before and they know what it takes.
Carlton, because I think their ball use is a little bit more cleaner. So.
I thought I was going to be the only one going Carlton and about to defend it, but okay. I really hope Richmond win, but then I want the earlier draft pick, so I need Carlton to win, but I hate Carlton, so go Richmond.
So who are you picking? I still don't know who you're picking.
I think Carlton will win, but I hope they don't.
I just want everyone to have a good time out there.
I hope they kill each other.
Go Sport.
I actually think Richmond. I think their defence will be too good. I think Carlton have just been too inconsistent, and I feel as if Richmond's forward line has a bit more potency than Carlton does, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was an upset. I think on that note, that's another show for the week. Same time, same place. You've been listening to...
And make sure we plug Bound for Glory News,
site, yes.
www.boundforglorynews.com. Follow us on Twitter at Bound for Glory News, and on Facebook, Bound for Glory News. Make sure you check out everything on our website. We've got, Rising Stars Under 18 coverage, Fantasy HQ, as well as opinion and feature pieces. You've been listening to Bound for Glory News. Bound for Glory Radio. If that's all, we will see you next week.
I'm invincible. I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I got my rocks off. Oh, how good is this?